Okay, so spoiler alert. I'm just going to go right out and tell you right now. Once every season of Dear Brie, I have decided that I want to write an anonymous letter myself and use that as an episode. And this is the episode that I did that for. I think it's important as the podcast host that I put my own vulnerability and honesty and some of the things I really wrestle with into the arena. And I was so privileged and honestly just blown away by the graciousness with which my letter was received in this episode with our guest. So it was something that I really needed to hear for myself. And I hope that you, dear community creator, if and when you ask the really important questions around belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion in your community, I think this episode is the first and best place to start. Welcome to Dear Brie, an advice column for community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. This season of Dear Brie is sponsored by our friends over at Heartbeat. Heartbeat is an all-in-one community platform, and it's the one I chose to host my own community. Your members can finally have events, conversation, content, and even courses in one distraction-free, intimate, customized home. I chose Heartbeat for 3 reasons. First, Heartbeat is unparalleled in their events management features. Events are a core part of my community architecture, and their features make my life so much easier. Second is segmentation. It's super easy to break my community into smaller, more niche subgroups and create a more customized experience for that group in Heartbeat. And finally, their courses. Being able to host my educational materials and learning journey in a community-first platform makes my community that much more valuable and retention that much stickier. I'm an affiliate with Heartbeat, which means when you sign up through my link in the show notes, I get paid a small amount at no extra charge to you. Thank you for supporting my work in that way. And finally, I usually record this podcast from Hawaii Island, so a special thank you to the Kanaka Maoli people on whose land I currently reside. Our letter today deals with a community builder who wishes they had been better about guiding their community through diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I have found the perfect person to help give us some new insights today. Jae Washington is a community consultant, curator, and connector who combines her passion for true belonging and inclusion to connect passion with purpose. Jae has experience at Zeenefits, and she was the head of global client community at Headspace, where she revolutionized engagement and community building within B2B organizations. Jae, welcome to the podcast.
Whoop, whoop. I am so grateful to be here. And I will say, I may not be the perfect person, but I'm a purposeful person. So let's go. Let's go.
That's even better. Even better. Thank you for that. I've had the privilege of connecting with you, Jae, before. I think maybe even like a couple of years ago now.
Yes.
As a fellow consultant. And so I'm so excited to have you on today because, Jae, I know DEIB was like something that you've worked on at Headspace, but I don't know the depth of it. So I'm really excited to get to glean some of the wisdom that I'm sure is very hard earned in your years in community.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Brie. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, to kick us off, this is a podcast about community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. Do you have any tea from your own experience that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Yes. Just because an organization hires you to manage or institute community does not mean they value community. And that is the tea.
Yikes.
And I need you to put some honey in there and stir it and drink it because that's the tea. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned as a community strategist is to not put all of our value in your employer's community basket. I just feel like so often many of us go in with this idea that leadership or the hiring manager has done the homework around understanding community, its impact, its value. There is some high level understanding of strategy. And I have just found in most of the situations I've been hired into, at a minimum, they don't have a very high level understanding of community and how it impacts ROI and key priorities and goals. And at the worst, they honestly don't give a shit. And it is a buzzword. It's an impulse hire or an impulse decision. And many of us have been left to build the car while driving it with subpar parts and mediocre support.
It sounds like you maybe been in this position before. What did you do in this scenario?
Cried a lot and meditated even more. The real goal sometimes as a community manager and strategist is to build community in the very organizations that have hired you to export it out to their customer base. And so educating people, being clear about what you can and cannot do. You are not there to save, you're there to support. And this very much lends to the question that your caller sent in. But like my experience as a community manager is very similar to my training as a behavior health and wellness coach. We are not here to save, we are here to support. We are GPS, we are not the driver. And so at the end of the day, the driver gets to choose whether they take our guidance and direction, or they decide to take the rogue route and go it on their own. And you have to be cool with that and not put your value into whether you are able to articulate well the value and whether they comprehend what you clearly articulate.
What I heard in that was do the work and release the outcome. Yeah, yes. That's really good. What are some questions? I'm thinking of some of our listeners who might be looking for community jobs and trying to suss out. It's a tough economy.
Yes.
Probably a lot of community managers are taking jobs that are, I know it's not ideal. I know this company probably doesn't have mission, vision, values, alignment behind community. So let's just assume that they're already in the role and realizing that. What's like a question that you would have them ask their upper management that could help tease that out and maybe help them suss out like where exactly is this company in terms of their like commitment to community?
I've been told through my behavioral health training that why can feel like a very aggressive question. But when you're talking to leadership, I think it's really important to know their why. Why did you think it was important to bring community into the organization? To understand their why can allow you to adapt yours as a community manager and strategist. So first, the why. And then also the how did you think this was going to happen? How did you think this was going to play out? And often they'll say, we hired you. That's how. But where else in any organization can you hire someone in a leadership role? Because most community managers are a team of one. How do you hire one person without having a clear outline, strategy, goal, expectation that ladders up to the organization goals? You can't hire a marketing manager. You can't hire a sales leader. You can't hire an engineer professional and not have a clear understanding of their goal and impact. Why is it okay to do that for community?
Which is a great opportunity if I can just plug our own role here and how we come alongside of companies. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a really great opportunity before the company is ready to hire a community manager to bring in a consultant like ourselves to define the scope of that role, to define the goals, the KPIs. You're not setting that person up for success when you invite them into the role and ask them to define the role at the same time. So at the minimum, bringing in some sort of support or coaching or mentorship for that person. At best, bringing in a different party like a consultant to help do the discovery phase before you're ready to hire on.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. And I think having that sets not only the organization up for success, but the employee, the community manager, and the cross-functional partners as well.
Yeah.
Look at that tea. I'll wipe my chin off and Say thank you.
Amazing. Tea and trouble. That's what it sounds like. Oh, all right. Are you ready for the letter I have prepared for you today?
I am. I'm very excited.
Dear Bree, over the years of leading and growing communities, there are many mistakes I've made and lessons I've learned, but none so deeply as how to support BIPOC folks in my community. I am a white, cis-hetero, able-bodied woman, and back in 2017, I was leading a community where several members of color were kind enough to encourage our leadership to take a hard look at why we didn't have very many members of color. This prompted a rather intensive personal DEIB journey for myself, our leadership, and our community. We recognized that our mission as a brand wouldn't be able to be accomplished without diversity, inclusion, and equity. Our community was made up of people all across the political spectrum, and there were varying degrees of acceptance from our members around our DEIB initiatives. When we brought in certified DEIB experts and consultants to partner with us, there was a lot of feedback about it not going far enough or being good enough. And then there was also feedback that these required trainings distracted them from the reason why they joined the community, which was to support the brand. We stumbled through making incremental change in the community, messing up, learning hard lessons, and promising to do better. While I'm proud of the progress we made, I mostly feel a profound residual shame. I'm sure it's rooted in my white privilege about not doing enough or defining what enough means for our community, because this work is truly never ending. This is messy work. It's never going to be easy, but I feel like I dragged myself and my entire community through the mud on this one. Any advice? If I had a chance to do it over, how would you recommend approaching this? Signed, Hopeful in Houston.
Oh, wow. Okay. I first want to thank Hopeful in Houston because it takes a lot. You're brave, and I appreciate and am grateful for your bravery and your vulnerability because it's tough. And I appreciate the reflection because so much we learn in hindsight in the rearview mirror. So thank you, Hopeful in Houston. I would love to offer her the 3 GRs. I think it's really important for her to look back with gratitude, grace, and growth. And that's how you sit in that space, I hope. My prayer is that you sit there because first be grateful for the experience. It may have cracked you open, but it cracked you open to allow you to grow. And then extend yourself some grace. Not perfect, but purposeful. The fact that you are asking these questions say that you care. And that care, that empathy, that compassion needs to be acknowledged. And I think grace gives us the space to do that. And when you can do that, there's the opportunity to grow. Those GRs are powerful. And my hope is that using the GRs to navigate a complex subject matter like DEIB is a space where you can have less guilt and less shame and more grace and growth.
The 3 GRs. I love that. Gratitude, grace, and growth. That's such a good place to start from. I feel that in my body. Thank you for that nugget.
I suffer a little so you don't have to. And I know on paper and in person, we may look different, but Hopeful in Houston, many of the feelings, emotions, challenges, triumphs that you've experienced, many of us, regardless of our race and ethnicity, have had to navigate those emotions when leading community because communities are diverse. Communities are complex. We don't all look alike, sound alike, view life in the same way. And so again, it's a challenge that she or he took up, this person took up. And that in and of itself is worth acknowledging. And so I want us to honor that. And I also know that a lot of this requires education and not leaning on others to educate you, but your willingness to do the work to educate yourself, to do as much as you can with what you know, and then allow the community to help navigate and grow you with what you don't.
Yeah, so I could understand from this letter, there's a gratitude to the community for bringing this up. I could also sense and could imagine that within this topic, you also don't want to place unnecessary pressure on Black, Indigenous, people of color to carry the work forward. And so there's a call for like personal work and an acknowledgement of the gap of, even though this person is doing their personal work, like they also still, everyone's on their own journey and it still might not be perfect. Well, what do we do with that? I'm like, it's like, I can sense I know I can't please everyone, but I feel like I can't please anyone. How do you approach that specifically in this conversation? I think we feel that sense in community in general, right? There's always going to be the sense of you can't please everyone, but what's the guiding compass and what direction to move?
I mean, being honest with yourself and showing up honestly as yourself. Like, I don't know everything. There's nothing wrong with being honest about where you are and clear about your own willingness to do some work. But this is a work in progress. Talk about DEIB. And so often we stop at the I and really discount the value of belonging. I think if we sit solidly in the space of belonging and creating spaces where people feel like they belong, it creates the psychological safety and the trust needed to make mistakes, to be vulnerable, to learn. And we talked about this earlier, building the car while driving it. So much of this work is learning in tandem with doing. And again, that is not a perfect process. And also not allowing you to be weighed down by the cruel criticisms of others. Because there's constructive criticism or constructive feedback. And then sometimes there are people who are wounded, bleeding on you. And it's a really difficult place to be in, to be one part salve and one part successor. Like, you are the steward, but you, again, you can support, but you can't save. And often people come in with a savior mentality, no matter how genuine. But most people aren't looking to be saved, even if they tell you they are. Most people are looking to be supported, acknowledged, to be seen. And so that belonging piece to me is far more valuable, especially in the foundation, in the beginning. You need belonging before you can have equity. And I think so often we focus so much on the first 3 letters of that acronym that we lose sight of the belonging.
Belonging is the foundation. Yeah. I think that also, my assumption is that when there's a foundation of belonging, that probably inherently helps with not creating that dynamic of savior, but rather support.
Yeah.
I don't know. Am I on point there, or is that?
You are. And I think you have the benefit, especially being in a place like Hawaii. I thought it was so beautiful, you honoring the land in the beginning of your podcast. That's belonging. That is a component of belonging. And belonging, again, creates the space to be seen. And that psychological safety where we can agree to disagree, because I can understand and trust that your intentions aren't anything other than understanding.
That's really good. That's really good. I'm thinking of our listeners, and I'm sure we'll have community creators who are in the midst of managing big communities and wondering. I think what we've identified so far is the first step being like your own personal work.
Yeah.
And acknowledging where you're at, being honest about that, being honest about where you want to go in the future and how much work you're willing to do, maybe as a first step. And I want to address kind of 2 different people who might be listening. One is the person who's managing a big community and wondering, okay, they've identified that they do want to do more work in this area. They're doing their own work.
Yes.
How can they start to help lead their community and organization forward into like becoming a safer space for belonging, diversity? We're going to flip it. Belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
So someone who's in an organization, they're like, Jae, I'm vibing with this. I want this. And how I'm maybe reporting to other company goals. I'm accountable to my community. I feel like community managers in a lot of ways are like, they're accountable to everyone, and it can be a real pressure cooker. What advice do you have for them?
I think, first of all, be clear in your strength and your genius. Gay Hendricks' books, The Genius Zone, talks about like honoring our genius and knowing what you do well and using those gifts, those strengths in a way that can help tell a story. Because storytelling is so much a part of an organization's overall brand identity. Who are we? Use your storytelling ability to leverage both your ability to connect people, to build resources and information. I want you to be able to use the gifts of a community professional and then gain the language needed to tell the story in a way that your organization can understand impact. I think in the beginning, I would talk community in a way that an elder in the community space said, well, because you're in community all the time, you speak at a high level, but you hear it at a very low level. Like you're talking about community at a very high level and people are like, I don't get it. Conceptually, I get it. So I don't like the term dumbing down or dummying down. I don't think you need to do that to anyone, but I do think you need to be clear and concise when talking about community and its value and creating the correlation of how community, because it does touch so many areas of the business, how it can impact those individual channels or teams in a way that articulates value to them, because that's what all this is about. Not only explicit value, but perceived value. So like talking in a way that you can provide a clear understanding of perceived and actual value. And I don't know if that answers your question.
So this is the thread I'm following. So saying, hey, before we can even have this conversation about bringing a better BDEI initiative to your community, we need to make sure that we're on the same team.
Yes.
We're on the same page with our team internally about what the value is the community is bringing to the company. I'll maybe go into the second step, and correct me if I'm wrong or amend this. Would the second step be, and now that we understand collectively the value of the community to the brand, what is the value of DEIB to our community?
Yes. And I think that's a beautiful place and a natural progression, because if you think about the beauty of community, oftentimes it's a diversity of perspective and experience of their members. So allowing people to own that. So often we expect community to produce these immediate effects that will then allow us to invest more in community, when it's the opposite. The reciprocity, the natural byproduct of community, is an investment in that belonging, that diversity, that perspective, that shared vision and purpose. When you have that cohesiveness, the natural byproduct is buy-in. The natural byproduct is ROI. The natural byproduct is reciprocity, both from the internal teams and your customers. And so often we think of it the other way. As a consultant, one of the acronyms I've created for my approach to a more mindful culture, a more mindful community within organizations, is a new state of being. And being is the acronym. B is for belonging, E is for equity, I is for integrity, N is for narrative, and G is for growth. And they're chronological. We first start with belonging. We create the psychological safety, the place for vulnerability and honesty and trust, which lends into equity. And most people cringe at equity because they think financial only. But there's so many different types of equity: emotional equity, community equity, collective equity. And once we've established that equity and distributed it evenly, we have to live with integrity around that. So whatever rules and parameters we've set up, we've got to honor that. And that creates the integrity, which then allows us to change the narrative and ultimately allows us to grow. And that's a high level conceptual foundation I like to build. And we can get specific based on your individual culture. You as employers and as leaders are your culture experts within your respected organizations. So we can dig in based on your wisdom and knowledge around culture in your organizations, and then use those tenets to change a culture and create a more cohesive community.
This podcast is sponsored by Ember Consulting, where I'm the founder and head community creator. At Ember, we help people who are familiar with running their business on content, coaching, or consulting become community powered. As you hear in this podcast, creating a community is really tough and managing it can be even harder. So don't do it alone. Whether you're looking to launch a new community or pivot your strategy, our one-on-one consulting helps you skip the learning curve and do it right the first time. And when you're ready to belong to a space just for community creators learning, testing, and growing their communities together, check out the Ember community. Now, back to the episode.
I love that tool you just shared. That's super helpful. Such a good reframe. And something I heard too when you shared about differences, and I'm translating this into my own kind of frameworks and terms. And in every community, I look at education and connection. If our similarities are the spark for connection, our differences beget growth and education. I think maybe that's a really helpful tie-in if part of your purpose in the community is to help your members grow and transform in some way. That mission can't be realized without having diversity and differences not only existing in your community, but celebrated and invited. Yeah.
So often it's seen as a negative and like, why? You look at a meadow of flowers and not one flower or blade of grass or even weed is more beautiful than the other because the culmination of the differences of the distinctions and the differences of that field or meadow is what creates the collective beauty of it. Honor that. We can agree to disagree. We can respect that others' lived experiences, no matter how different than ours, are no less valid. Honor that. The beginning of true connection.
Yeah, that ecosystem of cross-pollination, the support where my role is literally in service and support and provides the nutrients or exactly what this other person needs. Yeah, I use the analogy in my community of how we've thought about community, and especially as we've been conditioned from social media, is like industrial agriculture. And I think even a lot of the language around like niching down really has this like toxic effect of making us think that in order to niche down, we need to find the exact same people who all look the same and think the same. And that's the only way that we can really scale. But actually, the key to a thriving community is to approach it more like a permaculture.
I've often used the analogy of garden. Community is the garden. We are gardeners as community strategists and professionals. And so just to bring in concepts like industrial versus permaculture, like it's just such a beautiful way to build on that narrative.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Okay, I want to switch back to our other type of person who I'm thinking about on this episode, which is probably a lot of community creators who are just getting started, creating their community. Let's say it's a paid community because it's a little bit different than like building a community for a brand. And let's say they're like, hey, I'm doing my own work. I understand this is really important to me. And how do I start my community on the right track without biting off more than I can chew? Because I've seen some communities like with really big hearts for racial justice and everything surrounding DEIB, but almost the community purpose. It's not a racial justice community, right? That's not necessarily why people are coming. So talk us through that. How do we balance that?
Well, I will pull into a little bit of my Headspace experience and about being mindful. I think it's really important to be mindful. There's a distinction between plans and expectations. So it's important to have a plan because you can pause and pivot with plans, but you don't want the emotional prongs that expectations can have when building out a community. And so being present, being aware, being empathetic, really tapping into the members of your community to help guide and lead you in this building process. Like they're the ones who have to live in this house. So allow them to help build it, because then that creates accountability and responsibility and ownership in the success, error, the failure of the community, but also being mindful that what you're doing today, planting a seed, will not germinate tomorrow. So be intentional about that strategy and building processes that will allow you to scale in a way that honors both the organization and the individuals that make up the community.
Do you have any tips for setting those expectations for your community?
I am a big fan of, again, building it together. What are your goals around outcomes and needs? And then taking that to leadership within your organization and asking them, what can we do realistically and honestly? Because I think I'd much rather that happen. And even if there are things that we cannot do for our customer, be honest, be strategic about that conversation, but be honest about what we can and cannot do so that we are not selling a dream that ultimately becomes a nightmare for our customers.
Yeah. And I've had other letters actually where the community is asking and like wants more and more, and which is really good and like amazing that they're so committed and want to show up in the space. I think sometimes what I've intuited in the letters is that it's not always in support with the mission of the company.
Yes.
So where does that leave the manager? How do you balance if your community is asking for more? Or once, let's use the example of what I shared of, hey, we want like more work in racial justice to happen in this community. And let's say that the community manager also wants that, but also feels like this might not be the space for that. But is it ever not the space for that?
The reality is, yes, sometimes it's not the space for that. And we have to be honest about that. But what we are allowed to do as community people is that we don't limit community to the hours that we are hosting this forum. And like, you are empowered as an advocate, as a champion, to speak with like-minded community members and build extensions of community. Like, it's not like this insular experience. Yes, we have rules in this space, but that does not stifle you from growing the community to have your own space. There's a lot of times that community managers give those champions and advocates their own stage and forum. They are, whether inside the community, leading conversations and groups, or externally coordinating and scheduling things outside. There's a power that community members also have. That's why that accountability and responsibility piece is so important. It's just not my job as a manager to maintain community and its evolution and growth. It is the village. It is the village that holds the responsibility of the integrity and the evolution of a community. And so me being limited in my ability to offer you space or resources does not automatically remove the opportunity for those spaces to be. It's also finding other communities outside. There are spaces where social justice, DEIB are spaces where you can also build community. So it's not an all or nothing. Community is expansive.
I love that middle path that you found and articulated so well. I'm synthesizing in my mind what you shared, and I think I have a couple takeaways. One is, and the starting point that you mentioned, be really honest about where you're at, your capacity, and how this aligns or doesn't align with the direction of the community at the moment. Invite members that are ready to go and want more. Invite them in, and one, be dedicated to fostering that connection and that relationship with them. And number three, if it's in your power to provide them a platform within your community for other members to opt in and join with them, and for them to be like recognized as a leader in that area, do that, or provide supporting resources or other avenues where they can pursue that. I just want to acknowledge for myself as I'm hearing this and I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, if I was going to do that, I think the resistance that I feel is asking often the people who are bringing this up are the ones who care the most, who carry the heaviest burdens and have been like the most marginalized. And so to ask someone, invite someone like to do more can feel like, hey, we don't have capacity, but you can do more in the community. I think can be a tough ask. So there's a couple ways you can actually provide monetary incentive and pay people for the work if you're going to invite them into their community. Are there other ways to navigate that? Because we want to invite them in and provide a platform, but also don't want to put on more emotional labor for your BIPOC members of your community to have to carry it forward if you're not ready to, almost. Does that make sense?
It does, but I go back to support, not save. It is also not your job as a community member to provide all the answers and all of the solutions. Like, it's not, this is community work. It is not just a job. It is, and members have a right to say, no, I don't have the bandwidth. Just as you have the right to say, I don't have the bandwidth. This is real life, and we are whole humans, and this is not all that I have on my plate right now. And I think, again, being honest, I think all of us, whether we are community members or community leaders, understands that as an employee, as a parent, as a sibling, as a daughter, it's a complex relationship that we build with other community members. And to put all the responsibility on an individual or an organization solely because as a marginalized individual, you don't have the capacity or the privilege to do it is also unfair. It's also unfair. I honor that as a member, a Black woman, cisgender, able, like I also may not have the privilege that a white cisgender male might have, but I do carry my own privilege within my communities, within my groups. And so, like, how do I own that? How do I own that power? And be clear that I have the responsibility and the capability to honor that in whatever way I feel comfortable doing so.
For sharing that. I appreciate you letting me tease that out with you. That's really good.
I love your questioning. I love your reflection. Again, leaning a little bit on my behavioral health training. Bree, I just love the way you are curious and you are empathetic, but also holding me accountable in ways, honoring back with because this is just such a beautiful forum. And I am grateful for what you're offering both audiences and guests.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have one more surprise for you. Are you ready for it?
Let's go.
This was my letter.
Oh my gosh, I love that, Bree. And I often feel like sometimes people say I talk from such an esoteric space, and I do. I know. I often say you may not get the Jae Washington experience, but you'll respect it because at its core, there's a lot less business language and businessese in regards to like how we approach this from a business standpoint. But from my perspective, professional and personal, corporate and community, there is very little distinction when people are at its core. There's very little. And so for me, I'm talking in a language that speaks more around people and connection than it is to a specific business case. And I don't know, oftentimes people go, but it's the only way I know to do community.
Oh, yeah. No, I think your language is really accessible and speaks to the essence of community building without bogging it down with much businessese or corporate language. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for helping me tease out this letter. Like, this was something that has stayed with me in my journey as a community creator. And I think it's something I still like wish I could have done better and differently. And what I appreciate about our time together is your permission for me to reflect back with gratitude, to acknowledge that did the best that I could in that time. And there is still so much growth and hope in the future. And to not be shy about inviting my community alongside of me in that, and avoiding putting myself in the position of being the savior.
Yes. Yes.
100%.
Oh my gosh. And again, please know that it is not situation limited in DEIB spaces to those who are non-BIPOC. As someone who also hopes to continuously build community with integrity and authenticity, I also face those very challenges, even within a group that I would be considered a member.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You are
I really
so
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you for not only the tea, but also the testimony and the truth.
Oh, she's got all the alliterations today. I need this.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Jae, thank you for the work that you do. How can our members follow along your work or get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is my primary source of social interaction as far as like social media, but also jae.washington@birdlc.com. My company is all about being that little birdie in the hand, the one tool or one of many tools that I hope you think of when you think about how to grow a more mindful community. And so birdieinthehand.com is my website. You can find all my information there, or again, LinkedIn.
Wonderful. 10 out of 10 recommend. You can get in touch with Jae. We'll have the link in the show notes. And Jae, thank you for sharing just your warmth, your vibrance, and your very grounded and mindful presence with us on the podcast. I'm really honored to have you on this episode.
Oh, thank you. But I want to say until next time, please take care of yourself so that you can feed into a more whole and healthy community.
Words to live by for every community manager. So good. All right. Thanks, Jae.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing some space with me on this episode. Please like and review wherever you find your podcasts. To submit your own community conundrum, fiasco, or other drama, go to the link in the show notes. Aloha and catch you next time.